What is the hardest language in the world? It's actually nothing. So yeah, basically that's it. There's no hardest language in the world. Thanks for watching this video. No, but actually, this is just a personal opinion of mine. And it's a question that I get from a lot of people. I get it from my students who I teach English. I get it from friends and from family because everybody knows that I really love to study foreign languages. I've already studied languages like Russian, Italian, Czech, Slovak, Chinese. I looked at Portuguese for a little bit because I have some Brazilian friends. I am now learning a little bit of Greek actually, which is really fun. And the really interesting thing is that when you talk to people, you actually find that everyone says their language is the hardest language in the world, which really, for me, it blows my mind. Because my question for the world then is, how is it that every language is the hardest language in the world? So what I would like to do is finally make a formal video telling people about my opinion, why I think this way. I'll probably make this into a couple different parts because it's a really big question and it's also a really interesting question. But let's talk about the first thing, and that's what is hard? Well, what I think is hard and what you think is hard are not always going to be the same thing, and there's a really good chance that they're going to be completely different things. I think the best example is actually Chinese. I think people kind of generally say Chinese is one of the hardest languages in the world, and sure, it can be if you don't have the right motivation or if you don't learn the right way. But for me, Chinese is really interesting. It's really fun. Now, I'm not an expert at Chinese. I'm still just a beginner. I've forgotten a lot of things, but when I was learning Chinese in university and also in high school, Chinese was really fun. The writing style is very artistic. It was very easy for me to remember things in my brain. I could really excel at the spoken language at the very least because that's the easier part of the language after all. But for me, the writing even was something that was just very interesting and creative, and I just loved it. So for me, I never saw Chinese as hard. Of course, in Chinese, there are some characters where you have to draw it for 2 minutes before you finish that one character, but that's why I love it. That's why Chinese is so cool, and that's why I really love to learn it, and that's why I want to do more Chinese. It always gives me this feeling of I want to come back. And I had something very similar with Czech. I struggled with Czech a little bit at the beginning. It was a very new language for me, new grammar. It was my first Slavic language. I didn't know exactly how to handle the grammar of it. And so I had a little bit of a break, but when I came back to it, I changed my tactic. I changed my style of learning Czech, and from that moment on, everything clicked. And I fell in love with the language more and more and more. Every single day I studied, every single day I practiced the language. I already had the motivation to learn it because my friends spoke it, and I was like, wow, this is gonna be so cool, having a secret language in school and we can talk about people behind their backs and stuff. I had a lot of motivation for this. And also, I think the language sounds incredible. For me, it's probably my favorite language. So there are a lot of aspects, there are a lot of reasons why for me, Czech is not the hardest language in the world. But when I talk to Czech people, especially when I tell them that I learned it myself, they say, oh my God, you are completely insane. It's the hardest language in the world, and I would never want to study it. And it's funny because I get basically the same response from Russian people. They tell me that Russian grammar is ridiculous and that it's crazy, there's too many words, they would never want to learn it either. And I tell them, well, you're not me. You can't tell me that Russian is hard, because for me, Russian is very cool, very interesting, just like Chinese, Czech, basically any language. And what I really love is music. So I find music in all these different languages. And that's how I keep my love for the language alive, because I can interact with the language in a way that for me is easy. And it's something that I just love to do in general. So when my students ask me, what is the hardest language in the world? I have to tell them that no language is the hardest language in the world. And even if there is a hardest language in the world, it's most likely not going to be for you what it is for me. And one great example of this is I had a friend in university who really, really loved the Hindi language. And when I look at the Hindi language, I look at it and I don't have motivation to learn it. I've not tried it, but when the motivation isn't there, then we tend to say, okay, this language seems really hard. But let's take Czech, for example, or Russian because it has a different alphabet, or Chinese because that's a completely different language. And all of the people who I grew up with, if they look at these languages, they would say, these are the hardest languages ever. And I think it's mostly just because they don't have the motivation. They don't have the same motivation that I do to learn these languages. They don't have the same connection to the hobby of language learning. And that's what makes them say that it's difficult. And the last thing that I think I'll say about difficulty in a language is I think a lot of people tend to say some language is difficult, but they never even tried it. They just look at it, they say, okay, I can't read this. I don't know how to even pronounce this. And then immediately they say it's difficult, which I think is really hilarious because you can just go into some book, find a little information, 2 minutes later, you know how to pronounce a word. So at the end of the day, the hardest language in the world is not something anyone else can give you an answer to. You yourself have to go out into the world, and then you are the one who decides what languages are easy or hard. If you want a language to be easy, you have to just have some motivation. You have to have some kind of connection to it and some reason to learn it. And that motivation will already make it seem much easier, and that will help you get over any obstacles that you have with that language. If you want a language to be hard, go find some languages that you don't like, whether it's because of the alphabet, because of the sound, or really anything else. Find some languages you have no motivation to learn, and those languages for you will be the hardest languages in the world. So this has just been the first part for me sharing my opinion about what is the hardest language in the world. Of course, I'll make more parts to this as it's a very big question and very interesting one. All I really want to do is help you guys understand that languages are not really difficult, they're just new and interesting. And of course, please be sure to share your ideas, your opinions, whether you agree or disagree with me down in the comments. I would really love to know if this advice has helped anyone, because I know that it can be a very scary thing to learn a new language, but what I would really like to help do is take away this fear of some language just because everyone else says it's hard. Everyone else can have their own opinion, but at the end of the day, like I said, you guys are the ones that decide if a language is hard or easy, but if the love for the language is there, you guys can do anything. So, see you in the next part.